What would you do if a dying millionaire called you into his bedroom at midnight and asked you to fulfill his final wish? Picture this. You're 23 years old, working 3 jobs just to scrape together enough money for nursing school, and suddenly you find yourself standing in a mansion worth more than most people will earn in 10 lifetimes. The marble floors beneath your feet cost more than your annual tuition. The crystal chandeliers hanging overhead could pay off your student loans twice over, and the man who owns it all is asking you for something that will change everything you thought you knew about wealth, power, and the true meaning of legacy. Sarah Mitchell had been cleaning Marcus Wellington's mansion for 6 months when everything changed. She marked each day on her calendar because every shift meant another step closer to her nursing degree. Another small victory against the crushing weight of student debt. At 23, she had already learned that life rarely offered handouts, and when it did, they usually came with strings attached. The Wellington estate sprawled across 15 acres of pristine Connecticut countryside. The main house boasted 12 bedrooms, 8 bathrooms, and a wine cellar stocked with bottles worth more than Sarah's car. But despite its grandeur, the house felt hollow, as if all that wealth couldn't fill the emptiness that echoed through its halls. Marcus Wellington was 42 and looked like he had been carved from marble by an artist who understood true masculinity. Standing 6'2" with shoulders that filled out his custom suits perfectly, he moved through his domain with fluid confidence. His dark eyes seemed to see straight through people's facades, a quality that had undoubtedly served him well in boardrooms. What struck Sarah most wasn't his obvious wealth or good looks, but how he carried himself despite the pancreatic cancer that was killing him. You would never know it to look at him. He still worked out every morning, still wore his suits like armor, still commanded respect from everyone in his orbit. For 6 months, Sarah had maintained professional distance. She arrived at 7 each morning, cleaned efficiently, and left by 4 to rush to her evening job at the diner. Their interactions were minimal and polite. He would nod when he passed her in the hallways, sometimes comment on her thoroughness, but nothing more personal than observations about the weather. But something had shifted in recent weeks. She would be dusting furniture and suddenly sense his presence in the doorway, watching her with unusual intensity. When she turned to acknowledge him, he would offer that smile and make casual comments about her dedication, but his gaze lingered longer than propriety suggested before snapping back up to meet her eyes. The other staff had begun to notice. Maria, the head housekeeper, started giving Sarah knowing looks and making comments about how Mr. Wellington seemed particularly interested in the cleaning quality lately. James, the groundskeeper, mentioned that Marcus had been asking about Sarah's schedule. Even Mrs. Chen, the cook who rarely spoke to anyone, had pulled Sarah aside to warn her that wealthy men sometimes developed appetites beyond food. On this particular Tuesday evening in late October, the autumn chill seemed to seep through the mansion's walls. Despite the expensive heating, Sarah had stayed late to finish polishing the silver, a task Marcus had specifically requested for his business dinner the following night. The other staff had left hours ago, their footsteps echoing through the halls as they departed for their own lives. As Sarah packed her cleaning supplies, the soft chime of the intercom filled the empty space. Marcus's voice, deeper and more intimate than she had ever heard it, reached her. "Sarah, could you come upstairs, please? I need to speak with you about something important." The words were innocent enough, but something in his tone made her pulse quicken. There was a vulnerability there she had never heard before, a softness that suggested this wasn't about work schedules. She climbed the grand staircase slowly, her footsteps muffled by the Persian runner that probably cost more than most people's cars. The second floor was Marcus's private domain, a space she only entered to clean when he was away. Now, as she approached his study, warm light spilled from the doorway, creating an intimate glow that beckoned her forward, even as every instinct told her to leave. Marcus was waiting in his private study, the room adjoining his master bedroom. The space was dimly lit by a single desk lamp and flickering fireplace flames, creating shadows that danced across the leather-bound books lining the walls. He had changed from his business attire into a silk shirt the color of midnight, unbuttoned just enough to reveal the strong column of his throat. His expensive cologne filled the air between them. He sat on the edge of his massive 4-poster bed, long legs stretched out, hands clasped loosely in his lap. When she entered, he looked up with those penetrating dark eyes, and Sarah felt her breath catch. There was something different about him tonight, something raw and unguarded that made him seem more human and infinitely more dangerous. "Close the door behind you," he said softly, his voice carrying gentle command. Sarah hesitated, her hand on the doorknob, before complying. The soft click seemed to echo in the sudden silence, and she found herself trapped in this intimate space, with a man who had the power to change her life with a single word. "I've been watching you these past months, Sarah," Marcus began, his eyes never leaving her face as she stood frozen near the door, clutching her cleaning supplies like a shield. "The way you move through this house, the care you take with everything you touch, the quiet dignity you carry even when you think no one is looking. You're not like the others who have worked here. There's something special about you, something that calls to me in ways I didn't expect." Sarah's heart hammered against her ribs. This was it, she thought, the moment every warning had been leading to. She had heard stories about wealthy men who thought their money could buy them anything, including the women who worked for them. Her grip tightened on her cleaning caddy, and she took a small step backward. "You're so young," Marcus continued, rising from the bed and moving toward her with predatory grace. "So full of life and possibility. And I'm running out of time, Sarah. The doctors have given me 6 months, maybe 8 if I'm lucky. That's not very long to accomplish everything I still need to do, everything I still need to set right." He stopped just feet away, close enough that she could see the gold flecks in his dark eyes, close enough to smell his intoxicating cologne. His hand reached out as if to touch her face, and Sarah flinched backward, her back hitting the closed door with a soft thud. "Please," she whispered, her voice barely audible. "I need this job. I can't afford to lose this job." Marcus's hand dropped to his side, and for a moment, something that might have been hurt flashed across his features before being replaced by understanding. "Sarah, I think you've misunderstood why I asked you here tonight. I'm not going to hurt you or take advantage of you. What I'm about to ask of you is far more important than anything like that." He moved away from her, walking to his desk where a thick manila folder lay waiting. When he turned back, he was holding the folder against his chest like it contained the secrets of the universe. "There's something I need from you, something personal that I've never asked of anyone before. I need you to promise me something that will change your life forever, but not in the way you're thinking." Sarah remained pressed against the door, her breathing shallow as she tried to process this sudden shift. The fear coursing through her veins began to mix with confusion, creating a cocktail of emotions that left her dizzy and uncertain. "I don't understand," she managed, her voice stronger now but still trembling. "What could you possibly need from me? I'm just a maid, Mr. Wellington. I clean your house and try to stay out of your way. What could I possibly give you that you can't buy for yourself?" Marcus smiled then, an expression so genuine and warm that it transformed his entire face, making him look younger and somehow more vulnerable than she had ever seen him. "That's exactly why it has to be you, Sarah. Because you understand what it means to fight for something, to work for every opportunity, to know that education and hard work are the only things standing between you and a life of struggle." He opened the folder and pulled out a stack of legal documents, spreading them across his desk like he was revealing a treasure map. "I need you to help me create something that will outlive both of us, something that will change the lives of young people who are fighting the same battles you're fighting right now. I need you to help me build a legacy that matters." Sarah stared at the documents, her mind reeling as she tried to understand what was happening. This wasn't what she had expected, wasn't what any of the warnings had prepared her for. Instead of the predatory advance she had feared, Marcus was offering her something that seemed impossible, something that challenged everything she thought she knew about her place in his world. "I still don't understand," she said, taking a tentative step away from the door. "What kind of legacy? What are you talking about?" Marcus gestured to the papers spread across his desk, his eyes shining with passion that made him seem more alive than she had ever seen him. "A scholarship program, Sarah. A foundation that will provide full educational opportunities for underprivileged students, kids who are aging out of foster care, young people who have the intelligence and drive to succeed, but lack the resources to make it happen. I want to create something that will give them the same chance that someone once gave me." The words hit Sarah like a physical blow, stealing her breath and making her legs feel suddenly weak. She had expected many things when she climbed those stairs tonight, but this wasn't one of them. The man she had thought was about to proposition her was instead offering her the chance to change the world, to be part of something bigger than the small life she had been fighting so hard to build. "But why me?" she asked, her voice barely above a whisper. "Why not someone qualified? Someone who knows about running programs and managing money. I don't know anything about foundations or scholarships. I'm just trying to get through nursing school." Marcus moved closer again, but this time his approach felt different, less predatory and more protective, like he was trying to shield her from her own doubts. "Because you know what it's like to choose between buying textbooks and buying groceries. Because you understand that education isn't just about getting a degree, it's about hope. It's about believing that your circumstances don't have to define your future." He paused, his eyes searching her face as if looking for something specific, some sign that she understood the magnitude of what he was offering. "I've watched you, Sarah, not in the way you feared, but in the way someone watches a person they recognize. I see myself in you, the person I was before I had the resources to change my life. I see the determination, the refusal to give up even when everything seems impossible." Sarah felt tears prick at the corners of her eyes as his words sank in. No one had ever seen her that way before, had ever looked past the uniform and circumstances to see the dreams she carried inside her. Her parents had died when she was 17, leaving her with nothing but debt and fierce determination to make something of herself despite the odds. "I'm scared," she admitted, the words tumbling out before she could stop them. "I'm scared of failing, of not being good enough, of letting you down. This is so much bigger than anything I've ever done." Marcus reached out then, his hand gently touching her shoulder in a gesture that was purely supportive, devoid of any predatory intent she had feared earlier. "Fear is good, Sarah. Fear means you understand how important this is. But don't let fear stop you from becoming who you're meant to be. I'm not asking you to do this alone. I'm asking you to let me teach you, to let me share everything I've learned about building something meaningful." He gestured toward the documents again, and Sarah could see they weren't just legal papers, but detailed plans, budgets, and strategies for creating something truly transformative. "I have 6 months, maybe 8 if I'm lucky. That's enough time to set this up properly, to make sure it will continue long after I'm gone. But I need someone I trust to carry it forward, someone who understands why it matters." Sarah looked at the papers, then back at Marcus, seeing him clearly for perhaps the first time since she had started working for him. This wasn't about power or control or the whims of a wealthy man with too much time on his hands. This was about legacy, about using privilege and resources to create opportunities for others, about ensuring that his death would mean something more than just the end of a successful business career. "What exactly are you asking me to do?" she said, her voice steadier now, as she began to process the enormity of what he was proposing. Marcus smiled again, that same warm expression that transformed his entire face, and Sarah realized she was seeing the real man for the first time, not the polished businessman or intimidating millionaire, but the person underneath all that success and wealth. "I'm asking you to help me change the world, one student at a time. I'm asking you to be the guardian of a dream that's bigger than both of us." The scholarship program Marcus outlined was staggering in scope. $50 million would be set aside in an endowment to generate enough annual income to support hundreds of students every year in perpetuity. The Wellington Education Foundation would target the most vulnerable population, those aging out of foster care, young people who face their 18th birthdays not with celebration, but with the terrifying prospect of complete independence without family support or financial resources. Sarah stared at the numbers, her mind struggling to comprehend figures that seemed more like abstract concepts than actual money. But it wasn't the money that overwhelmed her most. It was the responsibility he was placing on her shoulders, the expectation that she could transform from a struggling nursing student into the director of a national foundation. "I can't do this," she said, backing away from the desk. "Mr. Wellington, you're talking about running a foundation, managing millions of dollars, making decisions that will affect hundreds of lives. I don't have a business degree or experience with nonprofits. I'm just a maid trying to get through nursing school without drowning in debt." Marcus watched her retreat with patient eyes. "Sarah, do you know why nursing requires the same qualities that will make you perfect for this role? Compassion, attention to detail, the ability to see people's needs even when they can't articulate them, and the strength to keep fighting for others even when you're exhausted." He positioned himself where she could see his face clearly in the lamplight. "You think you need business credentials to understand what these kids are going through? You think an MBA would teach someone how to recognize the look in a teenager's eyes when they realize they're about to age out of the system with nowhere to go? You already have the most important qualification. You know what it's like to fight for your education against impossible odds. The timeline was as daunting as everything else. 6 months, 8 at the outside, to establish the foundation's legal structure, develop selection criteria, create partnerships with educational institutions, and build the administrative framework. It meant Sarah would need to take a leave of absence from nursing school, something that terrified her because her education represented the only path she had ever seen toward financial security. "I know what you're thinking," Marcus said, reading the conflict in her expression. "You're worried about delaying your degree, about what happens if this doesn't work out. But Sarah, what if it doesn't fail? What if we create something that changes thousands of lives? What if your nursing degree becomes just one part of a much larger mission?" Over the following days, Sarah found herself unable to focus on anything else. She researched the Wellington Foundation online, trying to understand Marcus's background, but what she found only deepened the mystery. Marcus Wellington had appeared in the tech world, seemingly from nowhere, at age 25 with revolutionary software that transformed data infrastructure. His rise had been meteoric, but there were gaps in his story that didn't make sense. No mention of family background, no references to education or early career, no interviews discussing his childhood. It was as if Marcus Wellington had materialized fully formed as a successful businessman. What she did find were patterns of charitable giving that seemed oddly specific. Anonymous donations to homeless shelters in cities where Marcus had no business interests. Scholarship payments to individual students from economically disadvantaged zip codes. Property purchases in run-down neighborhoods, subsequently donated to community organizations. The giving was substantial and consistent, but secretive, conducted through shell companies that obscured the donor's identity. The breakthrough came when Sarah was researching scholarship programs for foster youth. She stumbled across a newspaper archive from 15 years earlier, a small article about a local coding competition won by an unlikely participant. The photograph made her breath catch. The young man in the picture was unmistakably Marcus, though he looked nothing like the polished businessman she knew. He was gaunt, his clothes obviously second-hand and ill-fitting, his hair unkempt. But it was definitely him. The same bone structure, the same intelligent eyes, the same confident posture even in humbling circumstances. The caption identified him as Michael Washington, age 19, a homeless teenager who had taught himself programming at the public library and entered the competition on a dare from a librarian. The article explained that Michael had been living in shelter since aging out of foster care, had no family support or financial resources, but his victory had earned him a full scholarship to technical college and attention from tech companies interested in his innovative approach. It was a classic rags-to-riches story. Sarah printed the article and stared at it for hours, trying to reconcile the desperate young man in the photograph with the sophisticated millionaire who employed her. The timeline made sense. The age was right, and the technical skills were clearly evident. But the name change, the complete erasure of his past, suggested shame or pain she hadn't expected from someone so confident. She began searching for more pieces of Michael Washington's story. Court records showed he had been removed from his mother's custody at age 7 due to neglect, spent 11 years bouncing between foster homes, never staying anywhere long enough to form lasting relationships. Despite the instability, he had been an exceptional student, particularly in mathematics and science, but his academic achievements were overshadowed by behavioral problems likely resulting from trauma and abandonment. The most heartbreaking discovery was a series of articles about a fire that destroyed the group home where Michael had been living during his senior year. 3 residents died, and while Michael survived, he lost everything, including the computer a teacher had given him. The articles mentioned he had been accepted to several colleges but couldn't attend because he had no way to pay tuition and no family support. Sarah realized she was crying as she read these accounts, understanding now why Marcus had been so passionate about creating opportunities for foster youth, why he had insisted she was the right person to lead his foundation. He wasn't just giving away money out of guilt, he was trying to ensure other young people wouldn't have to endure the same struggles that had nearly destroyed him. The next evening, when Marcus asked her to discuss her decision, Sarah brought the newspaper article. She placed it on his desk without saying a word, watching as his face went through surprise, recognition, pain, and finally resigned acceptance that his privacy had been breached. "How long have you known?" he asked quietly, his fingers tracing the yellowed clipping as if it were a relic from someone else's life. "3 days," Sarah replied, settling into the chair across from his desk. "I've been trying to understand why this foundation matters so much to you, why you're willing to give away your entire fortune for something that won't benefit you personally." "Now I know." Marcus stared at the photograph of his younger self with an expression mixing shame and sorrow. When he finally looked up, his eyes held vulnerability she had never seen before, as if the polished exterior had cracked to reveal the wounded young man underneath. "I legally changed my name when I was 26, he said, his voice barely above a whisper. "I wanted to leave Michael Washington behind, to bury that scared, angry kid who had spent his childhood being shuffled from one temporary home to another. I thought if I could reinvent myself completely, build enough success and wealth, I could erase the pain of those early years." He stood and walked to the window, looking out at his manicured grounds. "But you can't outrun your past, Sarah. No matter how much money you make or how far you climb, the memories follow you. The fear that it could all disappear, that you could end up back where you started, it never really goes away." Sarah felt her heart breaking for him, understanding now why he seemed so isolated despite his success, why the mansion felt so empty. "Is that why you never married, never had a family? Because you were afraid of letting people get close enough to see who you really were?" Marcus turned back to face her, tears glistening in his eyes, though his voice remained steady. "I told myself it was because I was too focused on building my company. But the truth is, I was terrified that anyone who really knew me would see the damaged foster kid underneath all the expensive clothes. I was afraid they would realize I didn't belong in the world I had created." What followed was unlike anything Sarah had ever experienced, a raw exchange that stripped away all pretense and revealed the fundamental loneliness that had driven Marcus to achieve so much while connecting with so little. He told her about the librarian who had let him stay after closing to use computers, about the teacher who had believed in his potential when everyone else saw only a troubled teenager, about the social worker who had helped him navigate the legal system when he aged out of care. These people had been his lifeline, and their kindness had shaped his understanding of how much impact one person could have on another's trajectory. "That's why it has to be you, Sarah," he said, returning to his chair and leaning forward with intensity that made her feel like the most important person in the world. "Not because you have the right credentials, but because you understand what it means to fight for your future against impossible odds. These kids don't need someone who's never struggled to tell them how to overcome challenges. They need someone who's been where they are." Sarah looked at the newspaper article again, seeing not just Marcus's transformation, but a roadmap for what the foundation could accomplish. "What happened to the librarian who helped you, and the teacher who gave you the computer?" Marcus smiled for the first time since she had confronted him with his past. "Mrs. Rodriguez retired 5 years ago, but I've been anonymously funding the library's computer lab ever since I could afford to. Mr. Chen passed away 3 years ago, but his widow received a substantial donation to establish a scholarship fund in his name. They never knew it came from me, but I wanted to honor the difference they made." The weight of responsibility Sarah had been feeling began to shift, transforming from a burden into something that felt more like purpose. She understood now that this wasn't just about managing money or administering scholarships, it was about continuing a chain of kindness that had started with strangers who had seen potential in a homeless teenager and decided to invest in his future. "I'll do it," she said, the words coming out stronger and more confident than she had expected. "I'll take a leave of absence from nursing school and help you build this foundation, but I have conditions." Marcus raised an eyebrow, clearly intrigued by her sudden shift from reluctance to negotiation. "What kind of conditions?" "First, I want to meet Mrs. Rodriguez and learn about programs that actually work for at-risk youth. Second, I want to visit some of the shelters and group homes where you lived, to understand what these kids are really facing. And third, I want you to be completely honest about your health and timeline, because if I'm going to do this right, I need to know exactly how much time we have." Marcus extended his hand across the desk, and when Sarah shook it, she felt like she was sealing a pact that would change not just her life, but the lives of countless young people she had never met. "Deal," he said, his grip firm and warm. "Welcome to the most important work you'll ever do." The transformation began the moment Sarah walked into Wellington Enterprises the following Monday morning, no longer as a maid, but as the founding director of the Wellington Education Foundation. Marcus had cleared an entire floor of his downtown headquarters for the foundation's operations, installing her in a corner office with floor-to-ceiling windows overlooking the city, where so many young people were struggling with the same challenges he had once faced. The learning curve was brutal. Nonprofit law, financial management, grant writing, program development, it left Sarah's head spinning most days. Marcus had hired consultants to guide her through the technical aspects, but he insisted on personally teaching her the strategic thinking that would determine success or failure. They spent hours reviewing applications from potential partner schools, analyzing demographic data, and developing selection criteria that would ensure scholarships went to students with both potential and determination to succeed. What surprised Sarah was how naturally the work came, once she stopped focusing on what she didn't know and started trusting her instincts. When consultants recommended a complex application process with multiple essays and interviews, Sarah pushed back, arguing that kids aging out of foster care often lacked the support systems to navigate bureaucratic requirements. When financial advisors suggested limiting scholarships to students with perfect grades, Sarah insisted that academic potential couldn't always be measured by traditional metrics, especially for teenagers whose educational experiences had been disrupted by instability and trauma. The first breakthrough came when Sarah visited the group home where Marcus had lived during his senior year. The facility had been rebuilt after the fire, but it still served the same population of older teenagers preparing for independence without family support. Walking through the halls where Marcus had once slept, studying in the same library where he had taught himself programming, Sarah began to understand the specific challenges the foundation needed to address. The kids she met weren't just lacking money for college. They were missing the entire support structure that most students took for granted. No parents to help with financial aid forms, no family members to co-sign loans or provide emergency funds, no network of relatives who could offer internships or job references. The foundation's scholarships would need to provide not just tuition money, but comprehensive support, addressing every aspect of the transition from high school to college and beyond. Sarah's second major insight came during a meeting with Mrs. Rodriguez, the librarian who had helped Marcus during his homeless years. Now 73, but still sharp and passionate about education, Mrs. Rodriguez had spent decades working with at-risk youth and had developed an intuitive understanding of what separated kids who succeeded from those who didn't. Michael was brilliant, Mrs. Rodriguez told Sarah over coffee in the same library where she had first encountered the homeless teenager who would become Marcus Wellington, but so were dozens of other kids who came through those doors. What made the difference was that he found people who saw past his circumstances to his potential. He needed more than access to computers and books. He needed someone to believe his dreams were possible. This conversation led to the Foundation's most innovative feature, a comprehensive mentorship program pairing each scholarship recipient with a successful professional in their chosen field. Marcus used his business connections to recruit mentors nationwide, creating a network of support extending far beyond college years. Each student would have not just financial assistance, but ongoing guidance, career advice, and professional relationships that could open doors and create opportunities. The legal battle Sarah had been dreading materialized exactly as Marcus predicted, with his estranged family challenging the Foundation's establishment and arguing that a man facing terminal illness couldn't be considered competent to give away his fortune. The lawsuit was ugly and public, with Marcus's cousins painting him as a reclusive eccentric, manipulated by an opportunistic employee. Media coverage was brutal, with outlets questioning Sarah's qualifications and suggesting she was taking advantage of a dying man's generosity. Marcus's health began declining more rapidly during the legal proceedings, though he tried hiding his deteriorating condition. Sarah noticed subtle changes, how he sometimes gripped his desk when standing, the multiplying prescription bottles, the increasingly frequent and urgent doctor calls. When she confronted him about his prognosis, he admitted the cancer was progressing faster than initially predicted. He might have months rather than the year they had planned for. The urgency drove them to accelerate every aspect of the Foundation's development, working 18-hour days to establish university partnerships, finalize legal structure, and select the first scholarship recipients. Sarah found herself making decisions that would have terrified her months earlier. Negotiating with college administrators, presenting to potential donors, speaking at conferences about the Foundation's mission. The first scholarship recipients were chosen through a process both rigorous and deeply personal, with Sarah insisting on meeting each candidate individually. There was Maria, 18, and aging out of care after 7 different foster homes, who wanted to become a social worker to help other kids navigate the system that had failed her. There was David, a brilliant young man who had been homeless for 2 years but maintained perfect grades while living in his car and working nights at a gas station. There was Keisha, who had been raising her 3 younger siblings since their mother's death and dreamed of becoming a doctor. Each story broke Sarah's heart and strengthened her resolve, confirming the Foundation was addressing a real and urgent need. These weren't statistics. They were young people with extraordinary potential who had been written off by a system that measured worth by stability and privilege rather than character and determination. Marcus insisted on personally meeting each scholarship recipient despite his declining health and the ongoing legal battle. Sarah watched him transform during these meetings, his businessman's reserve melting away as he connected with young people who reminded him of his own struggles. He shared pieces of his story with them, not the sanitized version from business magazines, but the raw truth about sleeping in library doorways and wondering if he was smart enough to deserve opportunities others took for granted. The most emotional moment came when Marcus met David, the young man living in his car while maintaining perfect grades. As David described showering at the gym before school, studying by streetlight when the car's battery died, choosing between gas money and food, Marcus began crying openly, seeing his teenage years reflected in this determined young man's struggle. "You remind me of myself at your age," Marcus told David, his voice thick with emotion. "Not just the circumstances, but the refusal to let those circumstances define your future. That's the quality that will carry you through college and beyond. Understanding that your current situation is temporary, but your education is permanent." The legal victory came just as Marcus's condition became critical, with the judge ruling that the Foundation's establishment was not only legal, but represented a thoughtful philanthropic initiative deserving protection and support. The ruling specifically praised Sarah's role, noting that her background made her uniquely suited to serve the Foundation's target population. But the victory came at a cost Sarah hadn't anticipated. Marcus was hospitalized the day after the court ruling, his body finally succumbing to the cancer he had been fighting with the same determination he had brought to building his empire. Sarah spent 2 weeks at his bedside, handling Foundation business from the hospital waiting room and watching the man who had changed her life slowly slip away. Even in his final days, he continued worrying about the Foundation's future, making Sarah promise she would expand the program nationally and ensure his story would inspire rather than define the organization's mission. The funeral was unlike anything Sarah had ever experienced, a celebration of a life that had touched thousands in ways both public and private. The church was filled with business leaders and politicians, but also with librarians and teachers, social workers and former foster children, people whose lives had been quietly transformed by Marcus's anonymous generosity. Sarah spoke at the service, sharing how a scared young Maid had been transformed into the leader of a movement that would change countless lives. "Marcus Wellington taught me that wealth isn't measured by what you accumulate, but by what you give away," she told the packed church, her voice steady despite overwhelming grief. "He showed me that the most powerful legacy isn't a building with your name on it, but the lives you touch and the opportunities you create for others to succeed." 3 years later, the Wellington Education Foundation had grown beyond anything Sarah and Marcus had originally envisioned, supporting over 300 students across the country and maintaining a 91% college graduation rate among its recipients. Sarah had completed her nursing degree through night classes while running the foundation, but she had discovered her true calling was creating opportunities for others rather than direct patient care. The foundation's success had attracted additional donors and corporate sponsors, allowing Sarah to expand the program's reach and develop new initiatives addressing broader challenges facing foster youth. They had established partnerships with major employers for internships and job placement, created a housing program helping students transition from college to independent living, and developed a peer support network connecting current recipients with program alumni. What Sarah treasured most were the individual success stories that arrived regularly, graduation announcements from students who had become the first in their families to earn college degrees, wedding invitations from young people who had found love and stability after years of uncertainty, birth announcements from program alumni breaking cycles of poverty by providing their children with security and support they had never known, The most profound validation came when Maria, one of the foundation's first recipients, graduated from social work school and was hired by the same agency that had once managed her foster care placement. She called Sarah on her first day, crying with joy as she described walking into the building where she had once sat as a scared child, now returning as a professional who could help other kids navigate the system. "I keep thinking about what my life would have been like if the foundation hadn't existed," Maria told Sarah during that emotional call. "I probably would have aged out with no plan, maybe ended up homeless or in an abusive relationship, definitely wouldn't have gone to college. Instead, I'm sitting in an office with my social work degree on the wall, about to help kids who are exactly where I used to be. It's like Marcus's story is continuing through all of us." Sarah often thought about Marcus during quiet moments in her office, wondering what he would think of how the foundation had evolved. She had kept his photograph on her desk. Not the polished professional headshot from business magazines, but the newspaper clipping of 19-year-old Michael Washington accepting his coding competition prize. A reminder that transformation was always possible, and that the most unlikely people could become agents of extraordinary change. The final surprise came on the 3rd anniversary of Marcus's death, when Sarah received a package from his estate attorney containing a letter Marcus had written during his final weeks, but instructed should not be delivered until the foundation had proven its sustainability. The letter was brief but devastating in its emotional impact, revealing that Marcus had been anonymously paying Sarah's nursing school tuition from the moment she started working for him, recognizing her potential long before she had seen it in herself. "You were never just a maid, Sarah," the letter concluded in Marcus's distinctive handwriting. "You were always the future I was investing in, the person I knew could carry this mission forward when I was gone. Thank you for proving that sometimes the most important legacies are built not by those who have everything, but by those who understand what it means to have nothing and refuse to let that define their destiny." Sarah read the letter 3 times before the full meaning sank in, understanding finally that her transformation hadn't been as sudden or unlikely as she had always believed. Marcus had been preparing her for this role from the beginning, seeing in her the same potential that Mrs. Rodriguez had seen in him decades earlier, investing in her future with the same faith that others had once shown in his dreams. The Wellington Education Foundation continued to grow, but its core mission remained unchanged: to ensure that no young person's potential would be wasted due to circumstances beyond their control, that education would remain a pathway to transformation for those willing to work for it, and that the cycle of generosity that had saved Marcus's life would continue through each student who received support and went on to help others in turn. Sarah had learned that true wealth wasn't measured in dollars but in lives changed, that the most powerful legacy wasn't what you built for yourself but what you made possible for others, and that sometimes the most unlikely partnerships could change the world one scholarship at a time.